Good morning, everybody, and we are back in the land of the rising sun. It is the 9th of January, and I'm back here in Japan, having come back from Taiwan. When did I come back? I came back on the 4th, so I've nearly been back here a week. It's my first day back at work tomorrow, but then I've only got just over 2.5 months, and then I'm done there. I don't have to see those fucking people again, which is fantastic. So I am busy at home now, bringing a episode of the podcast to you, and also to the right of me on my bed, I've got all my resumes, and it's all getting ready to go out, which is very exciting. Now, what I want to talk to you today on this cold but quite beautiful day. I'm now looking at bright blue skies. There are hawks circling outside my bedroom window, ready to pounce on mice or other smaller birds. So it's a nice day, but it's freezing. I've already been out for a cycle today, and my hands are in my pockets because I need to get them warmed up. So coming back from Taiwan and that holiday, the only thing that I wanted my kids to do when I found out that my wife was pregnant for the first time was to get them travelling. I just wanted them to have these experiences that I didn't really have till I were out of the house and making my own decisions. So I wouldn't say they were fancy holidays, they're more a traveller's holiday that I wanted them to have. And this was the first time that we'd really travelled around a country. But before I tell you about what happened in Taiwan, I'll go back to the holidays I used to have. Now, I know a lot of you who are listening to this because I get the stats up on my feed and it tells me where you're downloading from. Now, some of you are living in some of the most beautiful places in the world, especially in the English-speaking countries. You get a lot of people listening in Australia, especially around Sydney, where I lived for a year or so, and that is a beautiful part of the world. I've got people in New Zealand, west coast of America, where the beach is and the weather is absolutely fantastic. You put the opposite end of the spectrum to that for where I come from. I always wanted to get away on holiday or for good. And I think that puts a bit of lead in your pencil when you're from somewhere shite. Considering the amount of people that I know that I came up with that have got away, it makes me think that me and those people are built different. We're just built different. There are them that are prepared to sit in the shite, and there are them that are prepared to get out of it, and I was one of the latter. Now, talking about the opposite end of the spectrum, I know people who are from Australia, who are from New Zealand, America, and places that would or are an absolute paradise to me. Yellow, white sandy beaches, blue sea, blue sky, fantastic weather. That is a paradise to me. But those people that I've met that are from those places love the sun going down at 4:00 in the afternoon. They love the fog and the rain. They love all that. They love being cosy in the winter, getting in front of a fire. The rain, the fucking rain. Who fucking loves the rain? Rain is something that you've got to fucking deal with in England. It's something you just got to deal with. Fucking get it. Going to school, walking to school in the morning under a grey sky, under rain. You've only been out of the house for 10 minutes and your feet are fucking soaking, and you know that you're going to have wet feet all day at school where teachers don't want to be there as much as you do. Hopefully eating's going to be working at school. So then you've got 30 kids that have thrown the socks on radiator in classroom. So then The fucking whole school is stinking of damp, sweaty socks all day. That is what I wanted to get away from. But some people who grew up in these fantastic climates, surrounded by these beaches and palm trees, fucking palm trees. The fact that you grew up around palm trees is shocking to me. That you'd want to move somewhere where I'm from. Shocking. So, where I'm from, holidays were always something to look forward to. Something that would get you away for 1 or 2 weeks. And this is a thing that we all did. Now, in my family, what my mum and dad used to do was we'd book a week. We'd go away for a week every year, just 1 week. And it wasn't during the school holidays. And it wasn't during spring bank. It would be in Easter when it's cheap. That was the thing. The priority of holidays with my parents was, is it cheap? Yes. Where is it? Doesn't matter. Are we going to have to do much when we're there? No. Who's going to look after the kids? They've got entertainment on the site. Sold to the 2 tight fuckers from Yorkshire. So off we would go to Pontins, that holiday camp that Fred Pontin invented just after World War II. There were all these army barracks and naval barracks that were disused all around the coast of the UK. Now, Fred Pontin, a fucking genius in my book, saw this. He saw all these POWs and veterans coming back from Europe, from the Far East, from the Pacific. And he saw that they don't want to be bothering with their families when they go on holiday. They just want to go, have everything done for them, 3 square meals provided, and they didn't want to have to worry about what the kids were going to end up getting up to. Just get shut of the kids, make sure wife's happy, and just leave me the fuck alone. Fred Pontin knew that. So he went to the government and he bought up or rented from the government all these barracks, and they're dotted all around coast. The one that we used to go to were in Morecambe. There were one summer, well, not fucking summer, it was Easter time. There were one Easter when we went down to Great Yarmouth. Great Yarmouth in, is it Norfolk? We went down there. Or in East Anglia. It was like going abroad. And we were in Yarmouth because there were an American base down there where bombers used to take off and go wreak havoc over in Germany. So we went down there one holiday. So yeah, Fred Pontin bought up all this land and all these camps and then turned them into holiday camps. Now, by the time we started going in early 80s, they were going a bit downhill. But you'd turn up, you'd get given a chalet. Fucking chalet. It makes them sound like they were on the French Riviera or somewhere like that. So basically a chalet, it would kind of a fucking step up from the tiny, tiny apartments that you get in Japan. So you walked in the door, and immediately as you walked in, because we would get the cheapest thing, the door opened and there were a double bed. Off to right. And then straight in front of you, there was a door, and in that bedroom there'd be bunk beds or a single bed, which is where I was. And then off to right were a bathroom. And that were it. There were no need for a kitchen because you would go to the mess hall and have your breakfast dinner and tea in there. So you'd drop off your bags, you'd unpack. This would be on a Saturday afternoon, early afternoon. You'd unpack, and then I'd let my mum and dad unpack, and I'd get out and go and have a look round camp, because I knew early on that I was going to have to make some friends. Being an only child, you have to get out there and make some friends. Otherwise, you're going to have to hang about with your mum and dad all the time. And they didn't want you under feet. So I would get straight out and just find some kids to get up to mischief with. So I pissed off. I would say within an hour or two, you'd found people that you could knock about with. Now, all entertainment were provided, and all entertainment was shite. Absolute shite. Now, what Fred Ponting understood was, especially up in the north of England, is you needed to be good to work in these northern clubs. So what he did was he would go around these northern clubs and see all the entertainment that wasn't going down well in these clubs, and he'd hoover all that up and bring them to his camps. He'd get all the local, and I use this word very loosely, talent to come to his holiday camps, and you'd work there. Because you had a captive audience. It were an holiday camp, but it were also not a POW camp, but you didn't leave the confines of the camp. You were bordering on beach in Morecambe, but in Morecambe it were all mud flats. And I mean, there were a fantastic chip shop. I remember, I think we must have gone there three times, and only one time towards the end did I leave the camp. So you were in that camp for a full week, and you did not go outside that fence. You didn't go outside that fence. So you'd get there on a Saturday, you'd go and have your tea at night, and you'd walk in. And I've been in army barracks during late 80s and early 90s, and they were all the same wherever you were. You could be in Northern Ireland, you could be in West Germany, you could be over in Canada. They were all the same. And going to these army cafeterias after, I walking in every time I'd go into a new one, just like Ponting's, because it was just an old mess hall. So you go in and it was cafeteria style, and you could fucking load your plates up, and you could go back. And food wasn't that good, let's be honest. Food wasn't that good, but it only had to be to a certain level. And I mean, back in the early 80s, you were paying about 120 quid for a week, which in today's prices would be 120 quid for a week. It wasn't much. My dad wasn't forking out a lot of money for this holiday. Not at all, otherwise we wouldn't have gone. So then you'd go into this huge building. And I remember at Morecambe, Fred Ponting had turned this building, and it was supposed to look like an ocean liner, but it was an old aircraft hangar. You walked in, a massive stage at the end, and then off to the side you'd have bars at both sides. So wherever you were sat, there were always a bar where you could get your booze. Now, my family being from Yorkshire and being tight, they used to take their own booze in. So my mother would have a Tupperware of some spirit, maybe brandy or something like that. A Tupperware, wasn't even in a bottle or out. And she'd just go and buy mixers from bar and then top up. My dad would go buy he'd only be drinking a couple of pints, but he'd pay for them. But my mother would be taking a considerable amount of alcohol into entertainment for turn at night, and then pour it out of a Tupperware. And I can't remember how much the alcohol was, but that's how they would save a bit more money at Pontins. So that's what you did. You got up in the morning, you went and had your breakfast. There'd be all sorts of competitions going on during the day. You know, you'd have a water polo competition. There'd be all sorts of stuff for kids to do. So I wouldn't see my mum and dad until evening meal. So I'd go and have breakfast. You'd meet up with the friends that you'd made. You'd go and do the entertainment that were laid on for kids. And then I'd go back around 5:30 to fucking chalet. And then I'd meet up with mum and dad, and you'd go and have your tea at night. And then I'd go back and knock about with these friends that I'd made. And that's what we did. And I thought it were great. I did. I really did. I thought it were great. But when you look back, it was fucking shite. When you compare it to the holidays that I've had since, yeah, it were just holidays for unadventurous people, which my mum and dad were. You remember, you've got to think on, this would have been 80, 81, 82, maybe 83, 84, around that time. My mum and dad had never been abroad by that time. So in 82, my dad would have been 41. He didn't go abroad until he was 46, 47. That was the first time we went abroad. And we were only 50 mile away from where we lived in England. So it wasn't an adventurous thing to do, but it were a break from the norm. Because what we had was a touring caravan, which my mum and dad had left up in a field in Yorkshire Dales somewhere that we went to every weekend, which was awful. For a kid growing up, getting dragged up there from fucking Friday night until Sunday afternoon with no kids, nothing to do, nobody to play with, were awful. So this Pontins thing were kind of a highlight of the year for me because it just got away from that fucking norm. Now, Blackpool Morecambe is a big, what can you say, a big draw for people from Bradford. If you go back to the interwar years, like in the 20s and the 30s, you had Bradford holiday weeks, which were first 2 weeks in August. Everybody would jump on a train, and off they'd go to Blackpool. All the factories had shut down in Bradford, and everybody would be in Blackpool. So you would see everybody every day, the same people in Bradford. Bradford would shut down for 2 weeks, and then you'd go and see the same people in Blackpool, and then you'd come back. You see all these photos back in the day of people, men in suits, on the beach, trousers rolled up, bare feet in sand on deck chairs, just waiting for that fucking 2 weeks to finish so they could go back home. My mum and dad had their honeymoon in Blackpool. I mean, you go back now, it's a fucking horrible town. Regularly voted one of the top 10 worst places to live in the UK. Blackpool. Yeah, so even back then, I thought, I wanted to go where there were palm trees, where there were just places in Asia, Australia. They'd seen these things on telly. America were always a big draw for me. But in the 70s, a flight to America would be the price of an house. So that were always going to be a no-go for me. But there were people in my school, the odd kid that had been to America. There were a kid in my first school that emigrated to Australia. I remember when he told me that he were going to Australia and he were moving to Sydney. Martin, I'll never forget his name. I went home and I said to my mum, my mum and dad, can we move to Australia? Why would we want to do that? Why would we want to live somewhere like that? And then my dad told me, he said, I were going to emigrate to New Zealand. I were going to emigrate to New Zealand. The fella I were working with at Grattan in warehouse, he said to me, "Look, I'm emigrating. Why don't you come with me?" And my dad said, "Oh, I'm getting married. 21-year-old, I'm getting married." And he didn't bother. He stayed in Bradford. Like, ooh, that sliding door moment when you look back on your life. That's it. Now, circling back to what we started with, I'm trying to raise a couple of travellers. I'm trying to put this travel bug into my kids. So we went to Taiwan. Now, when we arrived in Taiwan, we jumped straight on the train and headed down to Kaohsiung City, which is the big city in the south of the country. And we went straight into this. I wouldn't say it's a resort hotel because it's up in the mountains. It's out of the city and it's up in the mountains. So we were there, and swimming pool, spa. There were a theme park, a big shopping centre that we could go into, and generally, it was just a place where we could relax. I still had a bit of online work to do, but I could get that done while the kids went off and entertained themselves with my wife, which was great. So we had that just as a settling in period, and then we were off travelling. So it got to the third day, we jumped on the bus, and then we were off to Taitung. Now, Taitung, getting there was a bit of a mare. So I went and booked the train tickets, and it turns out that I wasn't on the express train. We were on the local train. Now, everything got lost in translation a bit, although saying that, the Taiwanese are really, really good at speaking English. So if anybody's planning on going and visiting Taiwan, get yourself there. Don't worry about the language barrier, because they're fucking shitting themselves about China coming over the hill and coming over that strait and fucking bombing the shit out of them. That they're just trying to get as pally as they can with them, with the Americans. So English is a big thing for them. They don't want to be learning. Well, they already know the Chinese, but they really, really are really good at English. So don't worry about a language barrier. But I booked the wrong tickets. So halfway through this train journey, it turns out that we weren't going to rack up in Taitung till late at night. So we jumped off, got ourselves on an express train. We ended up having an hour in this village, I would say. This tiny, tiny village. So I'm out of the train station. Let's go have a look around the village. Now, stuff like this, where it's unexpected, for me, for the travelling I've done, is my bread and butter. You know, you go... we were about 200 metres from beach. So I thought, right, we'll go down to beach, have a look at the beach, come back and buy some food from a vendor. I love that sort of stuff. Turns out, kids don't. The kids just wanted to go to the convenience store, buy something sweet and sugary, and wait for train to turn up. Which is fair enough. You know, I've got a daughter that's going to be a teenager this year, and I've got a lad that is just talking and wanting to play football all the time. So we jumped back on the train, got to Taitung. Now, the thing is, with the way I used to travel, is we would have more time. But we only had 10 days. So we got to Taitung, didn't really have time to look round, so it were a case of getting something to eat, getting up in the morning and getting on the 10:30 boat. It wasn't a ferry, it was a fucking boat. It was sold to us as a ferry, but it was just a boat which we had to get over to Green Island. Now, I'm not one for suffering for seasickness, but hellfire, I had to grab onto all my resources to keep whatever was in my stomach down. Now, because I'm fasting, all the food that I had eaten the night before had already been digested. But saying that, I was still putting my fingers down my throat to throw up because I felt rough. I felt rough. And back in the day when I was drinking and you're laying on your bed and room's spinning and you just think, fuck it, I'll just make myself throw up, put the fingers down the throat. That's what I was doing on boat. But there were no for me to bring up. I was looking round at all these Taiwanese people. There were plastic bags put everywhere on the boat because they knew. And everybody were throwing up in these plastic bags. Whenever I was feeling a bit better, I'd look up and there were always somebody throwing up in a bag. So it was put my head straight back down in my lap. We got to Green Island. And in Green Island, New Year's Eve day we arrived. We would stay in there for the New Year celebrations. The weather were rubbish. The weather was rubbish. And there's no that will take the joy out of an holiday more than the fucking rain or greyness. Especially where I'm come from, because that's what you want to get away from. And even though I've not lived there for so long, it's still ingrained in you. And we didn't see any blue sky while we were there. But the thing I enjoyed about being on the island was about 6 months ago, I found this old Taiwanese prison on the island on Google Maps, and I wanted to go see it. So I used that as my main aim for going on holiday. So we hired some bikes, we cycled down to the prison. It was fucking started to piss it down big time. We had a look in the prison. The kids found this slightly interesting, which was put in the positive box for me. They did enjoy it a little bit, although my daughter won't admit to that so much. Now, I wanted to cycle all the way around the island. The rest of the family didn't. So I was saying to them, do you want me to come back with you? And en masse, they said, no, you piss off on your own. We'll go back to hotel room. So they went back to the hotel room. That 10k cycle, I think, fucked them up a bit because when I got back, they were all asleep. But I did the full loop of the island. I did the full 19-20 kilometres on this old grandma bike. It took me a couple of hours, but I got it done. And it was a fantastic cycle. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The whole island is a big volcanic rock. So in some places where the road can't go out into the sea, they've just chipped through the rock. Obviously, it's easy to chip through because it's volcanic. They've just chipped through it. And there are huge boulders that have fallen down that they've just built the road around. And it were a great cycle. Now, getting to this hotel, you're trying to pay for it. You've got to pay when you get there. So we went to pay when we got there. We didn't have enough money to pay in cash. So the credit card came out. We don't accept credit cards. What the fuck? Don't accept credit cards. So we went to the cash machine on the island. The cash machines on the island don't work with foreign cards, with international cards. Like, what the fuck? So we couldn't pay her. So that first day, for about 3 hours, we were trying to find a way of payment. But the Taiwanese woman, knowing what dire straits we were in, said, look, just pay me when you get back to Japan. Which, I found very, very trusting on her part. I wouldn't say it was a washout because I did enjoy that cycle around the island, but we were back on the boat, trying not to throw up on the way back. Now, my daughter had a hell of a rough time up way back. So the boat were all over the place. And it wasn't a ferry, it wasn't a fishing vessel, it was somewhere in between. But it were getting battered as we were going across. And she stood up to run to the toilet to be sick because she didn't want to be sick in front of other people. Unbelievable. And she went to run to the toilet, and because the boat were getting thrown about so much, she went in a horseshoe and just came back to the where she started off. Just got the bag and threw up in the bag. Anyway, on getting back, it takes you about 15 minutes to half an hour to get over this seasickness. Jumped in a taxi, got to the station, got our tickets to go up north. And I think the next port of call were Huel Lien. Now, this town for me looked really nice, but again, ballsed it up. We didn't have any time. We arrived at night, we left early in the morning. So we didn't really have any time to look around this town. And if you go inland from that town, there is a great gorge that for millions of years this river has been cutting through, and we just didn't have the time to go there. Anyway, when we were in Huel Lien, obviously it's a day after the Chinese premier had given this speech about taking Taiwan back into the fold very soon. And there must be some sort of Taiwanese base there, because there was nothing but jet fighters just going in and out. We were only there for 2 hours waiting for the train, but it was just in and out with these jet fighters. So we got our train tickets to Taipei, and then on the express train for about 2.5 hours. A fantastic train journey. You've got the ocean and the beach on the right side, and on the left side, if you look at the topography of Taiwan, there is a huge mountain range that goes all the way up the east side of the country. It's a natural barrier to China, but that Pacific just comes battering off that sea, so it's very, very windy that side of the country. Very windy, but it's beautiful. So you've just got these natural gorges, this river and waterfalls, passing a waterfall every 2 minutes. It's a beautiful place, a beautiful train journey. So getting up to Taipei, just a normal Asian clean city. It's not filthy like these Southeast Asian or Indian capital cities or cities. It's clean, it's safe, it's got a fantastic transport system, which is easy to navigate. So we went and saw the main monuments. It were pissing it down all the time again. So you couldn't really enjoy it. The 2 good days of sunshine that we had, we were in a train, which were quite annoying. But we ate good food, we saw some great things, but now the kids are getting on that cusp. They don't want to do what we want to do. They want to do their own thing. The last 2 days at holiday, my daughter's saying, I wish I were back with my friends. She's already put the kibosh on going back to England in the summer. She's not coming back with me, so it's just going to be me and the lad. She was sick of travelling in the summer. You know, going to Indonesia, Singapore, England, France, Belgium. Didn't want it. Don't want to do it. So hopefully she will get back that love for travelling. You know, compared to the holidays I had, where I'm in a caravan getting woke up at fucking 3 o'clock in the morning to your mother pissing in a plastic bucket. It's the opposite end of the spectrum. We both hated travelling when we were that age for wildly different reasons. And hopefully she'll get it back. But that is my first podcast of 2024. The year of the dragon. Is it the dragon? I think it's the dragon this year. Maybe it's the dragon. I'm sure it is. If it's not, it'll be something else, obviously. So that's that and that's that. And I will see you all next week for another podcast. Happy New Year, everybody. We're all back to it.